The world had never been a kind place for Amelia Rose Bennett. From the very beginning, life had dealt her cards no one should ever have to play. At just 23, she knew more of sorrow than of hope, more of cruelty than of kindness. The small, crumbling house on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina, where she had spent most of her life, felt less like a home and more like a trap. A beautiful city surrounded her, a place where tourists marveled at pastel-colored mansions and oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. But for Amelia, beauty existed only beyond the glass, never within her reach. After her mother's death, when she was only 10, Amelia had been left in the care of her Aunt Lydia, a woman whose bitterness had curdled into cruelty over the years. Aunt Lydia had never asked to raise a child, and she made sure Amelia knew it every single day. She was treated, not as family, but as an unwanted burden, a live-in servant who cooked, cleaned, and endured verbal lashings without thanks or tenderness. In Lydia's sharp, dismissive voice, Amelia heard the constant message: "You are nothing. You are invisible." The mornings were the worst. Amelia would rise before dawn to the shrill screech of Lydia's voice demanding breakfast or berating her for imagined slights. Each insult chipped away at the fragile remnants of self-worth Amelia tried so desperately to preserve. She worked herself to exhaustion for scraps of kindness that never came, feeding a hope she couldn't fully extinguish no matter how often. Reality tried to crush it. Her cousins, Vanessa and Brett, were no better. Born into the illusion of Southern gentility, they wielded their superiority like a weapon. Vanessa would laugh behind perfectly manicured nails as she tossed Amelia's meager belongings into the dirt, while Brett, with his smug smirks, loved to remind her that no one would ever want someone like her. Poor, motherless, unworthy. Amelia had dreams once. Big ones. She had wanted to paint, to capture the world's beauty on canvas and show it to people who might otherwise miss it. Art had been her escape, her sanctuary, the only place where her voice could exist freely. But dreams were luxuries in Aunt Lydia's house, and luxuries were not permitted. Every time Amelia picked up a paintbrush, it was torn from her hand, replaced with a mop or a laundry basket, as if daring to dream was an act of defiance punishable by further cruelty. Still, she endured, because despite it all, a tiny flame deep inside refused to go out. It whispered that somewhere, somehow, there had to be more to life than this. One rainy afternoon, Amelia stood barefoot in the kitchen, scrubbing floors slick with soapy water, when she heard Lydia's footsteps click-clacking down the hall. Instinctively, Amelia straightened, ready for another complaint. But instead, her aunt entered with a look Amelia had rarely seen. Calculation. "You're wasting space here," Lydia sneered, arms crossed. "I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone a useless mouth like yours. You want to survive? Then get out there and find a job. Don't come back until you've made yourself useful." It wasn't a request. It was an exile. And just like that, Amelia found herself pushed out into the storm, clutching a threadbare coat and a heart that ached with a terrible mixture of fear and hope. The streets of Charleston blurred around her, cobblestones slick beneath her worn shoes. She didn't know where to start. No resume, no references, no experience beyond housework. Who would even give her a chance? But she walked on rain-soaking, through to her skin, until, by pure accident or fate, she stumbled into the heart of the historic district. There, nestled between a French bistro and a high-end boutique, was a gleaming glass tower so out of place it almost didn't seem real. Bennett Enterprises, the lettering said in shining gold script. Something pulled Amelia forward, a force she couldn't explain. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was destiny. Inside, the building smelled of leather and success. Men and women, in designer suits, floated across marble floors, phones glued to their ears, important conversations passing by in a blur. Amelia shrank against the wall, dripping and shivering, painfully aware of how she didn't belong. A receptionist, polished and brisk, looked up from her desk with a frown. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she didn't think anything could help Amelia. I'm looking for work," Amelia stammered. Her voice cracked under the weight of humiliation. The woman's lips pursed. She looked Amelia up and down, as if measuring her and finding her irredeemably lacking. "We don't hire walk-ins, especially not without an appointment." Amelia nodded numbly, turning to flee before her pride shattered completely. But at that very moment, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Wait." It was just one word, but it carried authority, warmth, and something else: curiosity. Amelia turned toward the voice and found herself face to face with a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed impeccably in a midnight blue suit that looked custom-made for his powerful frame. His dark hair was artfully tousled, and his jaw was shadowed with the kind of stubble that gave him a rugged, almost dangerous handsomeness. But it was his eyes that truly arrested her. A shade of piercing steel gray, intense and unyielding, softened only by a flicker of intrigue as they met hers. Dominic Carter. She didn't know his name yet, but one day soon it would become the center of her world. Dominic studied her, his gaze missing nothing, not the tremble of her fingers, the rain-drenched hair clinging to her pale cheeks, nor the bruised look of someone who had spent far too long being unseen. Something in her vulnerability reached inside him and gripped, hard. It was irrational, inexplicable, but he didn't question it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amelia," she whispered. "Well, Amelia," he said, his voice gentler now, "come with me." The receptionist's jaw dropped as Dominic gestured for Amelia to follow him past the polished brass gates that marked the entrance to his personal offices. It was madness. It was completely against protocol. And yet Amelia obeyed, as if drawn by an invisible thread. She had no idea that in a few short weeks her entire life would change, that this rainy afternoon, born of rejection and hopelessness, would become the moment her real life began. In Dominic's private office, a space of glass, steel, and understated luxury, he offered her a chair and a towel, speaking with a kindness that disarmed her defenses even as it terrified her. He asked questions, listened closely, never once making her feel like she had to justify her existence. And then with a small, almost self-deprecating smile, he said something that turned her world upside down. "I'm not just looking for an employee," he said. "I'm looking for something more personal. I need someone willing to take a leap of faith. Someone to be by my side, to share in a life most people could only dream of." Amelia blinked, sure she had misheard. "I need a companion," he continued. "Someone I can trust, someone real." It sounded insane, too good to be true. And yet, as Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, Amelia saw no deceit, no cruelty. Only a man who was tired of being alone, who was offering her not just a job, but a chance to rewrite her entire story. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, to remember that nothing good ever came without a price. But her soul, bruised but still yearning, it whispered, "What if this is the chance you've been praying for?" So, with a courage she didn't know she still possessed, Amelia lifted her chin and said the words that would alter her destiny forever. "I'll take that leap." Dominic's answering smile was slow, devastating, and filled with something that made her shiver, not from fear, but from a hope so sharp it was almost painful. "Good," he said, his voice rich with promise. "Because once you step into my world, Amelia, you'll never be alone again." And in that moment, even drenched and trembling, Amelia dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer invisible. Maybe she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed Amelia's fateful decision were a blur of wonder, disbelief, and a quiet, gnawing fear that it might all disappear. Dominic Carter had not wasted time. From the moment she agreed to take the leap with him, he had whisked her into a new life that felt nothing short of surreal. She was given a suite on the top floor of his personal residence, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the glitterings, Charleston Harbor, where the waves lapped gently against the shore and the sky blushed pink every evening at sunset. Amelia had never imagined luxury like this. She had spent her life sleeping on sagging mattresses and eating cold leftovers in dim, crumbling kitchens. Now she woke to the scent of fresh linens and the sight of sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across marble floors. Every morning felt like stepping into someone else's dream. Dominic treated her with a gentleness that shattered every defense she had spent years constructing. He did not demand. He did not order. Instead, he asked her opinion on everything. Where they should dine, what art they should buy, whether she liked the new garden. He was planning on the rooftop. It was as if he genuinely cared about her thoughts, her feelings, her happiness. A kindness so foreign it left her breathless and suspicious, battling the deeply ingrained fear that it was all a game she didn't understand. But Dominic never gave her a reason to doubt him. Day after day he showed her through his actions that she was not a burden, she was not invisible, she was seen, heard, and valued. He introduced her gradually to his world. Lavish charity events where Charleston's elite gathered under sparkling chandeliers. private yacht trips to nearby islands where the air smelled of salt and freedom, quiet dinners where it was just the two of them, laughter softening the air, the candlelight catching the warmth in Dominic's usually steely eyes. Amelia marveled at the way he moved through life with effortless command. He was powerful, yes, but it was not brute power. It was a quiet certainty that drew people to him, made them listen when he spoke and trust him even when they shouldn't. And yet with her there was a different side, softer, almost vulnerable. At times, as if letting her into his life had peeled back layers no one else had ever touched. The more she saw, the more she felt herself slipping into hope, slipping into something far more dangerous, the beginnings of love. One evening, about a month after Amelia had entered his world, Dominic arranged for them to visit Magnolia Plantation. The historic gardens, draped in ancient oaks and heavy, with the scent of camellias, were closed to the public that evening. It was just the two of them, wandering under the Spanish moss that danced in the breeze. Amelia wore a simple dress, cream-colored cotton, fluttering just above her knees, a far cry from the grand gowns she saw at Dominic's gullus. Yet, the way he looked at her as she walked toward him, shy and unsure, made her feel as if she were royalty. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. They wandered down a winding path, the air thick with the hum of crickets and the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms. Dominic reached out once to take her hand, his touch feather-light, giving her the chance to pull away if she wished, but she didn't. Their hands fit together more perfectly than she could have ever imagined, his larger, warmer fingers curling around hers protectively, as if promising without words that he would never let her fall. They walked in silence for a while, the world reduced to just the rustle of leaves, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, the wild beat of Amelia's heart. She could feel him watching her sometimes, a weight against her skin that made her pulse quicken. Finally, they stopped at the edge of a small pond, where lily pads floated like forgotten wishes and the reflection of the moon shimmered on this water. Dominic turned to her, his expression unusually serious. "Amelia," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "There's something I need to tell you." She stiffened instinctively, fear coiling in her chest. Was this the moment the dream shattered? Was he going to tell her it was over, that her place in his world had been a temporary kindness, a fleeting fancy, but his next words stole the breath from her lungs. "I didn't bring you here just to save you from something terrible," he said. "I brought you here because when I saw you, standing there in the lobby looking like you had lost every battle but still hadn't given up, I realized you were exactly what I had been searching for, even when I didn't know I was looking." Amelia's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I know I didn't say it before," Dominic continued, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "I didn't want to overwhelm you. I didn't want you to feel trapped. But you need to know, you already belong with me. You already belong to me." His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles, and it was the tenderness of the gesture, not the possessiveness of his words, that broke her. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the golden halo of moonlight that framed his head like a crown. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice thick, trembling. "I know what it's like to feel abandoned," he said, stepping closer until there was barely a breath of space between them. "To feel like the world would keep turning no matter how much you scream for someone to notice. I promised myself once I'd never let anyone matter enough to hurt me again." He smiled then, bittersweet and beautiful. "But you wrecked that promise without even trying." For a moment, Amelia didn't move. She was frozen between fear and longing, caught between the girl who had learned to survive and the woman who dared to hope for more. Then slowly she lifted her free hand and pressed it against his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. He covered her hand with his, trapping it there. "You're mine, Amelia," Dominic said, his voice a reverent murmur. "Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine forever, if you'll let me." A sob escaped her lips, not of sadness, but of the overwhelming, shattering joy of being wanted. Not for what she could do, not because she was useful, but simply because she was herself. "Yes," she whispered, the word tasting like salvation. Dominic cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head up so she could see the fierce tenderness blazing in his eyes. "I'm going to make you so happy," he promised. "I swear it." And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of dominance or conquest. It was a kiss of devotion, of promises made without words, of a lifetime offered with open hands and an open heart. Amelia melted against him, her hands curling into the soft fabric of his shirt, her body yielding to the truth she could no longer deny. She belonged here, with him. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because tomorrow, and every tomorrow after that, would be filled with love, with Dominic, with a life she had only ever dared to dream about, and this time, she wasn't dreaming at all. The days following that night in the gardens unfolded like a slow, delicate symphony. Dominic did not rush her, did not push for more than she was ready to give. Instead, he wove himself into her life with patience and unwavering tenderness, each moment another thread binding them closer together. Amelia was still learning how to live without fear. Every morning she woke half expecting the floor to drop out beneath her feet for the world to remind her that happiness was a temporary visitor in her life. But every time she opened her eyes, it was Dominic she saw first, sitting by the window reading a newspaper or waiting with a steaming cup of coffee or simply watching her with a softness that made her chest ache. He gave her space but never distance. He offered freedom without abandoning her. And slowly, cautiously, Amelia began to blossom. One bright afternoon, Dominic surprised her with a small studio tucked away in the French Quarter of Charleston. It wasn't grand or lavish, like everything else he owned. It was personal, filled with natural light and the scent of old wood and fresh paint. Easels and canvases stood waiting for her, shelves lined with vibrant paints and sketchbooks. Amelia stared at it all in disbelief, the keys to the studio trembling in her hand. "You said once you loved to draw," Dominic said, stepping behind her, his voice a warm rumble against her ear. "I wanted you to have a place that's yours, somewhere you can breathe and dream without limits." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she fought them back, turning to face him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with gratitude too big to contain. Dominic simply smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with a touch so gentle it made her heart stutter. The studio became her sanctuary, a place where she could pour out the emotions too tangled for words. She sketched everything, the way the sunlight hit the harbor at dawn, the delicate petals of the gardenias Dominic kept sending to the penthouse, even the haunted echoes of her past, slowly, bleeding onto canvas until the pain no longer owned her. Dominic visited often but never intruded. Sometimes he would sit quietly in a corner, pretending to read while sneaking glances at her with an expression so reverent it made her chest tighten. Other times he would bring her lunch, leaving it on the side table with a soft kiss to her forehead before slipping out again. In those quiet afternoons, Amelia found herself healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. Yet as the days grew warmer and the world seemed to spin a little slower, shadows still lurked at the edges of her happiness. Late at night, when Dominic was asleep beside her, Amelia would stare at the ceiling, fear gnawing at her heart. Could love like this really last? Could someone as extraordinary as Dominic truly want someone like her forever? Doubt was an old enemy, one she didn't shake easily. One evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare, memories of harsh words and slammed doors, Amelia found herself sitting alone on the rooftop terrace. The city glittered below, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She pulled her knees to her chest, staring up at the stars and wondering if they had always looked so far away. Dominic found her there. He didn't say a word at first. He simply sat beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch, offering silent comfort. After a long while, he spoke. "You're afraid I'll leave you," he said, not accusing, just stating a truth he had somehow plucked from her soul. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut, ashamed by how transparent her fears were. "I wouldn't blame you," she whispered. "I'm broken." Dominic was silent for a moment, the weight of his gaze a tangible thing. "You're not broken, Amelia," he said finally, his voice low, fierce. "You're a masterpiece that survived a war." She shook her head, tears slipping free despite her best efforts. "I come with scars," she said, her voice breaking, "with pieces that don't fit right." Dominic reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Good," he said simply, "because I don't want perfect. I want real. I want you." Amelia turned to him, her breath hitching when she saw the raw honesty in his eyes. "You don't have to be anything other than exactly who you are," Dominic said. "You don't have to hide the hurt. You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time. Let me be strong for you when you need it. Let me carry it with you." His words wrapped around her heart, binding up the broken pieces with golden thread. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to trust that someone stays." Dominic cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then we'll learn together," he said, his voice a vow carved into stone. However long it takes, however many times you need me to prove it, I'll be here. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a kiss so tender it shattered whatever was left of her fear. Amelia closed her eyes and breathed him in. The scent of his cologne, the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart. She let it anchor her, let it root her in the present instead of drowning in the past. In that moment she made a choice. To believe him, to believe in them, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. In the days that followed, Amelia began to let Dominic in even more. She showed him her favorite sketches, shy and blushing as he praised her talent with such genuine awe it made her dizzy. She told him about her childhood, the good moments hidden between the pain, the way her father used to lift her high into the air and call her his little star before life grew dark. Dominic listened with a reverence that broke her heart anew, because no one had ever cared enough to listen before. In return, he told her pieces of himself too, stories of growing up, with too much money and not enough love. Of a cold, calculated world that had taught him to guard his heart so fiercely, he hadn't realized how lonely he had become until the day Amelia stumbled into his life. I built walls so high even I couldn't see over them, he confessed one night as they lay tangled together under the covers, the city lights painting shifting patterns across their skin. But you didn't knock them down. You walked right through them without even trying. Amelia smiled, tracing lazy patterns across his bare chest. I wasn't trying to, she whispered. I know, Dominic murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That's why you're the only one who ever could. They fell asleep like that, tangled in each other, safe in a way Amelia had never believed possible. And for the first time in her life, the future didn't terrify her, it thrilled her, because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had Dominic and he had her. As summer unfurled fully over Charleston, the days grew longer and more vibrant, and Amelia found herself invited into more aspects of Dominic's life. He wanted her present, not just in the soft moments of stolen kisses and whispered promises, but in the sharp, brilliant edges of his real world, boardrooms, charity galas, evenings at the opera. At first, Amelia balked at the idea. She wasn't a socialite. She didn't know the first thing about cocktail parties and navigating the glittering world Dominic lived in with such effortless ease. But he only smiled, as if her fears were inconsequential, as if the idea of her not fitting in was unthinkable. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, he said one evening as he fastened the delicate necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck and sending a shiver racing down her spine. That's who I want by my side. Her first event was a gala fundraiser held at the Charleston Museum. All shining marble floors, sweeping staircases, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Amelia's hands trembled as she adjusted the simple, elegant dress Dominic had chosen for her. Deep emerald silk that clung to her figure in a way that made her feel exposed yet beautiful. The moment they stepped through the grand entrance, every head turned. Dominic Stone was a legend in this city, a self-made millionaire who rarely showed his private life. To see him arrive not alone, but with a woman on his arm, a woman he looked at like she hung the stars, caused an electric buzz through the room. Amelia felt the weight of the stares, the whispered gossip, the sharp glances of women who had once vied for Dominic's attention. She fought the instinct to shrink into herself, to disappear. But then Dominic tightened his hand around hers, leaned down and whispered in her ear, "You belong here because you belong with me. Forget them, sweetheart. Look at me." And so she did. The night was a blur of sparkling conversations, dazzling laughter and whispered congratulations. Dominic never left her side, introducing her as Amelia without hesitation, with pride ringing in every syllable of her name. He didn't treat her like a charity case or a secret. He treated her like his equal, his partner. At one point during the evening, while Dominic was pulled away to speak with a senator about a new urban renewal project he was spearheading, Amelia found herself alone by the towering windows overlooking the glittering city lights. A woman approached, tall, blonde, stunning, in a red designer gown that probably cost more than Amelia had earned in a year back when she was scrubbing floors. "You're the new girl," she said, her voice smooth and dripping with thinly veiled disdain. Amelia straightened her spine, remembering Dominic's words. "Look at me. I'm Amelia," she said simply, offering a small smile. The woman's lips curled, in a mocking smile. "Of course you are. Just be careful, darling. Men like Dominic, they don't keep charity projects forever." Amelia's stomach twisted, shame and fear rearing their ugly heads. She wanted to run, to disappear. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled wider, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she realized in that moment something powerful. This woman didn't know Dominic the way she did. She didn't see the man who brought her coffee every morning just the way she liked it, who carried her art supplies up 3 flights of stairs when the elevator was broken, who whispered mine against her skin when he thought she was asleep. Dominic wasn't using her. He loved her. Later, when she told him about the encounter, his face darkened with a fury so fierce it made her breath catch. "Give me her name," he said, deadly quiet. Amelia placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady, grounding beat. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "You're the only one who gets to define what we are." The look in his eyes then, a mix of reverence, love, and bone-deep devotion, was worth every harsh whisper, every judgmental glance. That night, Dominic made love to her with a desperation that bordered on worship, as if trying to erase every doubt, every insecurity that had ever been planted in her mind. And Amelia let him, surrendered to him, trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. Their connection deepened with each passing day. Dominic showed her the world, Paris in the springtime, Rome in the golden light of autumn, the beaches of Maldives where they swam in water so clear it felt like floating in the sky. But no matter how far they traveled, the greatest adventure was still the quiet, simple moments. Cooking breakfast together in their bare feet, dancing in the living room to songs only they could hear, whispering promises into each other's skin when the world outside faded away, and yet a storm was brewing on the horizon. Amelia's stepfamily, who had once so cruelly cast her aside, began circling back into her life, not out of love, but greed. Word of her new life had reached them through the social pages, and like vultures sensing a feast, they came swooping. First, it was a letter, thinly veiled with fake concern. Then a voicemail, tearful and full of false regret. Amelia showed Dominic the messages one night as they sat curled together on the massive sectional in the living room. He read them all, his face unreadable, his hand tightening around hers. "You don't owe them anything," he said quietly, his voice vibrating with suppressed anger. "But their family," Amelia whispered, a lifetime of guilt clawing its way to the surface. "No," Dominic said, turning to cup her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Family doesn't treat you like trash. Family doesn't sell you to the highest bidder. Blood might tie you by birth, Amelia, but love is what makes a family. And you are not obligated to give pieces of yourself to people who never deserved you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, tears of relief, of release, because deep down she had needed someone to say those words, to give her permission to let go. Dominic kissed her then, slow and deep, as if sealing a promise between them. "You're mine now," he whispered against her lips. "Mine to protect, mine to love. And no one will ever hurt you again." Amelia closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her soul, a balm over old festering wounds. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't powerless. She was loved, fiercely, endlessly. And for the first time in her life, Amelia knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The air had shifted between Amelia and Dominic. It wasn't just love that wrapped itself around them anymore. It was a profound sense of belonging, a soul-deep bond that words could hardly capture. And yet, the looming shadows of the past, though weakened, had not disappeared entirely. One morning, as Amelia stepped out into the terrace of their Charleston estate, the crisp air carrying the scent of salt from the nearby ocean, she found Dominic standing by the railing, staring into the horizon. His posture was tense, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the wrought iron so hard that his knuckles turned white. She approached him quietly, the soft whisper of her bare feet on the stone unnoticed. For a moment, she simply watched him, marveling at the complexity of the man who had become her entire world. "What's wrong, love?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Dominic exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing slightly at her touch. He turned, gathering her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I received a letter today," he said, voice low, almost reluctant. Her heart skipped a beat. "From whom?" He hesitated, then pulled the crumpled envelope from his pocket. Amelia recognized the handwriting immediately. Her stepsister's, written in that same careless scrawl she remembered from their teenage years. She took the letter with trembling hands and unfolded it. The words leapt out at her like venom. "We see how you're living now, Amelia. You owe us. Without us, you would have been nothing. You have 2 choices. You help your family, or we make sure the world knows the truth about your past." The paper slipped from her fingers, carried away by the wind, but the words had already etched themselves into her mind, poisonous and cruel. Dominic's hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You owe them nothing," he said fiercely. "Your past is nothing to be ashamed of, and no one threatens what's mine." A tear slipped down her cheek, more from the weight of years of buried pain than the current threat. I thought I left them behind." "You did," Dominic said. "They're just trying to chain you back to their misery because they can't stand to see you rise." He was right. She knew he was. But still, part of her, that broken, frightened girl who had once believed she was worthless, ached with guilt. "Maybe if I just talked to them?" She started. Dominic shook his head, his thumb brushing away her tear. "You don't negotiate with people who only know how to destroy. You don't need to give them another inch of your life, Amelia." The conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a shield. She leaned into him, absorbing his strength, his certainty, wishing it could erase the trembling fear lodged in her heart. Later that evening, Dominic made a few calls. Amelia didn't ask what he was doing. She didn't need to. She trusted him. And when he pulled her into his study, sitting her down on the worn leather sofa, she knew whatever was about to happen was for her. "I've hired a private investigator," he said calmly. "We're gathering everything. Every debt, every crime, every dirty secret they've hidden. If they dare to come after you, I'll make sure they regret ever thinking your name could be dragged through the mud." Amelia's breath hitched. Not because she doubted his power. She had long understood that Dominic could move mountains, with a whisper, but because of what it meant. He wasn't just protecting her. He was fighting for her. It was something no one had ever done. Not her father, who had passed too early. Not her stepmother, who had seen her as nothing more than competition. Not her stepsister, who had taken every opportunity to remind her of her supposed insignificance. But Dominic. Dominic fought like a man possessed. Like a man who had found something so precious, so vital, that he would destroy anything that threatened it. That night, Amelia lay in bed beside him, her head resting over his heart, listening to its steady, unwavering beat. His arms were wrapped around her, a silent fortress against the world. "I'm not scared," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You shouldn't be," Dominic said, his lips brushing her hair. "Not when you have me." She believed. Him. The days that followed were a mixture of calm and underlying tension. Dominic continued with his business affairs, with his meetings and projects and negotiations. But Amelia knew he was quietly weaving a web around her, a protection so complete it left no gaps for fear to slip through. Meanwhile, she poured herself into her own pursuits, the art classes Dominic had encouraged her to take, the volunteer work she had begun at the local community center, helping children from broken homes find solace in creativity. It was during one of these afternoons, surrounded by bright colors and the messy laughter of children, that Amelia realized something profound. She was not a victim anymore. She was not a shadow, a whisper, an afterthought. She was becoming someone she could be proud of. Someone who could give love, not just receive it. She was healing. One night, weeks after the letter incident, Dominic whisked her away for a surprise trip to Paris, the city of lights, of love, of second chances. They walked along the Seine, hand in hand, the Eiffel Tower glittering above them like a dream. They ate warm crepes from street vendors and sipped wine at tiny cafes tucked away in cobblestone alleys. They made love in a hotel suite overlooking the city, the kind of tender, slow worship that left Amelia breathless and crying from the sheer intensity of it. On their last night in Paris, as they stood on a bridge watching the city reflect in the dark, glimmering water, Dominic turned to her, his expression serious. "I bought this bridge," he said casually, a teasing glint in his eye. She laughed, shoving his shoulder lightly. "You did not?" He grinned. "Okay, maybe not. But if I could, I would. I'd buy the stars, the sky, the whole damn world if it meant keeping that smile on your face." Amelia blinked back sudden tears, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not material things, but a love so deep, so all-encompassing, that it scared her in the best way. "I don't need the world," she whispered, pressing her palm against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. "I just need you. You have me," he said simply, "forever." And with those words, sealed by a kiss that tasted like eternity, Amelia knew, truly knew, that no matter what storms awaited them, no matter what ghosts tried to claw their way back from the past, they would face them together. Dominic. Stone wasn't just her protector, her lover, her partner. He was her home. The days following their return from Paris felt like stepping into a new life. Paris had not just been a trip, it had been a rebirth, a reaffirmation that Amelia was no longer shackled to the chains of her past. Yet even as the memories of the city of light warmed her heart, reality back in Charleston demanded their attention. Dominic was relentless in ensuring her peace. The investigations against her former family, Olivia, her cruel stepsister, and their bitter mother, Estelle, had uncovered even more treachery than expected. Hidden bank accounts, forged documents, blackmail attempts against others who had once been friends. It was enough to ensure that any whisper of a threat against Amelia could be crushed before it even reached her ears. But Dominic didn't just destroy threats, he rebuilt dreams. One afternoon, Amelia stood at the edge of a vast open piece of land on the outskirts of Charleston, the warm southern breeze playing with the hem of her dress. She turned to Dominic, confusion shining in her eyes. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "But why are we here?" Dominic slid his hands into his pockets, a mischievous smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Because I'm building you a home." Amelia's breath caught. Not just a house, a home. The word echoed in her chest, stirring up emotions too powerful to contain. "I already have a home with you," she said. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his large, steady hands. "And now you'll have one you helped create, brick by brick, room by room, a place where every corner holds your dreams." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. She wanted to remember every detail. The sincerity in his deep blue eyes, the softness of his smile, the way the sunlight haloed around his tall frame. Together, they spent weeks poring over architectural plans, discussing colors, textures, gardens. Dominic insisted that every choice, every decision be hers. Amelia, for the first time in her life, felt not just heard but cherished. Each day brought new excitement, sketching designs for the nursery they dreamed of filling one day, imagining the warm kitchen where future holidays would be spent, laughing, loving, living. And it wasn't just the house that was being built. There, relationship deepened in ways words could barely touch. Every conversation, every touch, every stolen moment reinforced the foundation of trust, respect, and devotion they were laying between them. But life, as it often does, tested the strength of their bond. Amelia had been painting in her small art studio, a surprise Dominic had built for her in a sun-drenched corner of their current home. When her phone buzzed, she almost ignored it, lost in the colors swirling on her canvas, but something urged her to pick it up. A trembling voice greeted her. "Amelia, it's Olivia." The sound of her stepsister's name still had the power to send a cold shiver down Amelia's spine. Her first instinct was to hang up, to sever the cord like a surgeon cutting away rot. But something stopped her. I'm sorry," Olivia choked out. "Please, can we meet?" Amelia said nothing for a long, long moment. The part of her that had been so thoroughly wounded whispered warnings. Don't trust her. She's only reaching out because she needs something. And yet, another part, smaller but insistent, remembered that once, long ago, before cruelty had hardened Olivia's heart, they had shared laughter, secrets, even sisterly love. That night, she sat across from Dominic at dinner, her plate barely touched. He noticed immediately. He always did. "Something's wrong," he said. She hesitated, then told him everything. About the call. About the plea. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He let her finish, his hand steadying her trembling fingers where they twisted in her lap. "You don't have to see her," he said gently. "You owe her nothing." "I know," Amelia whispered. "But maybe I need to hear it. I need to face it." Dominic's gaze darkened. "If you do this, I'm coming with you." Amelia's heart warmed at his protectiveness. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hand. "But I need to do this alone." Reluctantly, he agreed, but not without making her promise to meet Olivia in a public place, to keep her phone on, to call him the second anything felt wrong. The next day, Amelia walked into the cafe, her heart hammering against her ribs. Olivia sat in the far corner, a shadow of the girl Amelia once knew. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face pale, eyes sunken with guilt or grief. Amelia couldn't tell which. They stared at each other for a moment that stretched into eternity. Finally, Olivia spoke. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice cracking. "For everything." Amelia sat down carefully, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Why now? Olivia swallowed hard. Because I lost everything. Mom is gone. Debt collectors hound me. Day and night. No friends, no family, nothing. And it made me realize I became exactly the kind of monster she was. Amelia stayed silent. I don't expect forgiveness, Olivia continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I needed you to. No, it wasn't your fault. None of it. You deserved love and we stole it from you. The words pierced Amelia's heart, raw and unexpected. There were no dramatic scenes, no declarations of reunion. Amelia simply stood after a long moment, her chair scraping against the floor. I hope you find peace, she said quietly. But my life, my happiness, they're not yours to seek absolution through. And with that, she walked away. Away from guilt, away from the chains of the past, straight into the arms of her future. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. Dominic was leaning against his black car across the street, arms folded, watching her. When their eyes met, she saw it, the steady, unwavering faith he had in her. She broke into a run, and he caught her effortlessly, holding her so tightly it stole her breath. You're mine, he whispered fiercely into her hair. Forever. And, for the first time, Amelia truly believed it. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for fear. She had chosen love. She had chosen herself, and she had been chosen in return by a man who would stand beside her, shield her, love her until the stars burned out and the oceans dried. That night, as they lay together, under a sky dusted with stars, Dominic murmured into her ear promises of tomorrows, of dreams yet to be built, of a lifetime woven from 1,000 tiny perfect moments. And Amelia, wrapped in the only arms that had ever truly felt like home, closed her eyes and smiled. Her past had been a battlefield, but her future, it was a love story, endless, fierce, and beautifully hers. In the days that followed her meeting with Olivia, Amelia felt a profound sense of lightness, as if an invisible burden she hadn't realized she still carried had been lifted from her shoulders. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't always mean reconciliation. It meant reclaiming her own peace, her own power. She had walked away with her head high, her heart free. Dominic sensed the change in her too. He didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. He simply held her closer at night, kissed her forehead more tenderly, and looked at her as if she were made of stardust and dreams. As spring blossomed across Charleston, their new home began to take shape. Every day after work, Dominic would drive Amelia out to the construction site. They would walk hand in hand among the skeletal beams and fresh wooden frames, imagining their future in every nail hammered, every wall raised. Amelia loved it most when they wandered through the unfinished rooms at sunset, barefoot, their laughter echoing in the hollow space. They would sit on the frame where the future front porch would be, sharing ice cream cones Dominic always remembered to bring, watching the sky turn into a watercolor masterpiece of pink, orange, and violet. This will be the kitchen, Amelia would say dreamily, twirling under the bare rafters. We'll have Sunday morning pancakes and dance barefoot on the tiles. Dominic would grin, tugging her into his arms. And this, he'd murmur, kissing her temple, this will be our forever. Every beam, every stone, every whispered promise became part of their tapestry, a future handwoven with love, laughter, and resilience. One afternoon, as Amelia stood admiring the large oak tree that shaded a corner of their property, Dominic came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. There's something else, he said, a glint of mischief in his deep blue eyes. Amelia tilted her head curiously. What? He pressed a small velvet box into her hands. Heart hammering, she opened it slowly, revealing a delicate, handcrafted key pendant, made of white gold and tiny diamonds. It's the key to our home, he said, voice rough with emotion. But it's also a symbol of every door you've had to break down, every cage you escaped, every future you're now free to walk into. Amelia's throat tightened unbearably as she reached up to trace the pendant with trembling fingers. I love you, she whispered, voice cracking with the weight of everything she couldn't say. I know, Dominic said, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of salt and sunlight and the endless future ahead. Their days slipped by like dreams, each one a new page in the life they were creating together. Dominic, ever the visionary, insisted on planning not just their home, but a life that extended far beyond the material. They volunteered together at local shelters, using their resources to quietly rebuild the lives of others who had been forgotten, just as Amelia once had been. There was a day when Amelia knelt to help a little girl tie her shoes at the shelter, and when she looked up, Dominic was watching her with such raw tenderness that it nearly brought her to tears. "You were born for this," he said later that night as he brushed her hair back from her face, his fingers gentle and reverent. "Born to heal, to love, to be loved." Amelia smiled through tears, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart that now beat in rhythm with hers. Another evening, over candlelight in their favorite cozy restaurant, Dominic spoke of dreams that stretched even further. "I want to travel the world with you," he said, taking her hand across the table. "I want to see the sunrise over the Sahara, dance with you under the northern lights, get lost with you in the markets of Marrakesh, kiss you on the cliffs of Santorini." Amelia laughed, a sound like bells, bright and pure. "I thought we were building a home." Dominic's smile was slow, devastating. "We are. But our home is wherever you are. This house will be our foundation, but our life, it will be limitless." It was on one of these blissful nights, as Amelia was curled against Dominic on their couch, a soft blanket covering them and a fire crackling nearby, that he broached a topic that took her by surprise. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, and hesitant in a way that instantly made Amelia turn to him in concern. "About what?" "About family," he said. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way that stripped him of all the armor he usually wore. "About us having one." Amelia's breath caught. She had dreamt of it secretly, quietly, too afraid to even put the wish into words. "I don't want to pressure you," Dominic continued quickly. "You've been through so much. I wanted you to know it's something I want. With you. When you're ready." Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She pressed her forehead against his, her heart so full it hurt. "With you," she whispered. "Always." That night, they made love with a tenderness that was different from all the times before. It was slower, deeper. A silent vow wrapped in the touch of skin against skin, the whispered promises that needed no words. Months later, as the seasons turned and the finishing touches were being added to their home, Amelia stood once again, under the ancient oak tree, the key pendant resting against her heart. The house behind her was no longer a skeleton of beams and dreams. It was real, solid, filled with love and laughter and the promise of forever. Dominic came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Welcome home, Mrs. Grant," he whispered against her skin. Amelia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had taken her from the ashes of her old life and built her a kingdom of love. "I'm home," she said, voice trembling with gratitude and awe. And she was, not just within the walls of their beautiful house, but in his arms, in his heart, in a life that was finally, irrevocably, wonderfully hers. The days that followed were an intoxicating blend of serenity and excitement. Amelia and Dominic settled into their new home as if the walls themselves had been waiting to embrace them. Life unfolded slowly, sweetly, like the first notes of a song they had waited a lifetime to hear. Amelia discovered a part of herself she had never known existed. She found joy in the simplest things. Tending the small herb garden outside their kitchen, rearranging fresh flowers in glass vases scattered around the house, curling up on the porch swing with a worn novel while Dominic worked on his laptop. Nearby, glancing up now and then just to watch her breathe. Every moment was a revelation. Dominic, true to his word, devoted himself entirely to their shared life. No deal, no meeting, no business empire was ever more important than her. It was in the way he lingered over breakfast, refusing to rush the morning spent with her. It was in the way he answered every phone call with a clipped, impatient tone if it interrupted their stolen afternoons. It was in the way his eyes softened every time they met hers, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. One evening, as a storm rolled over Charleston, Amelia stood at the window watching the rain trace frantic patterns across the glass. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and flashes of lightning momentarily lit up the room. She wrapped her arms around herself, not out of fear, but in reverence for how different her life had become. Storms once used to terrify her, each crash of thunder reminding her of nights spent alone in the dark, unprotected. But now, she stood safe inside a home built of love, with a man whose arms were her refuge. Dominic found her there, silhouetted against the window. Without a word, he wrapped her in a thick blanket and pulled her onto the couch. They spent the evening in front of the fireplace, the storm forgotten, lost in stories of dreams yet to be fulfilled. Amelia spoke of wanting to start a small charity for girls like her, girls who had been discarded, mistreated, but still carried within them an ember of hope. Dominic listened intently, his fingers stroking slow, lazy circles on the back of her hand. "You were made to change lives," he murmured, voice low and sure. "Just like you changed mine." Tears shimmered in Amelia's eyes, but she blinked them away, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. He believed in her even more fiercely than she had learned to believe in herself. Their bond deepened, not just through grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments. Shared breakfasts, lazy Sundays reading in bed, impromptu slow dances in the kitchen, while dinner simmered on the stove. Their life was a testament to the beauty of simplicity, the kind of love that didn't need constant fireworks to burn brightly. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the historic streets of downtown Charleston, Amelia paused in front of a charming little art gallery tucked between two larger boutiques. The window display was vibrant, alive with paintings that seemed to leap off the canvas. Her fingers pressed against the glass. "I've always wanted to paint," she confessed almost shyly, as if it were a secret too delicate to speak aloud. Dominic's squeezed her hand. "Then you should," Amelia laughed, shaking her head. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "You start by believing you can," Dominic said simply, his tone making it sound as inevitable as breathing. "And by letting me buy you that gallery." Her eyes widened, a protest on her lips, but Dominic silenced it with a kiss to her forehead. "It's not about the gallery," he said. "It's about giving you a space where you can create, where you can find another piece of yourself. You gave me your heart, Amelia. Let me give you the tools to build your dreams." True to his word, by the end of the week, Amelia was standing inside the sunlit gallery, the keys cold in her trembling hand. Tears blurred her vision as she looked around the empty space that was no longer empty, not in her mind. She saw walls filled with color, tables scattered with brushes and paints, children laughing during free art classes she would someday host. She turned to Dominic, who leaned casually against the doorway, watching her with a knowing smile. "I don't even have the words," she whispered, overwhelmed. "You don't need them," he said. "Just promise me you'll fill this place with your heart." She ran to him then, laughing through her tears, throwing her arms around his neck as he lifted her effortlessly off the ground, spinning her in a slow, giddy circle. "This is our life," Dominic whispered into her hair. "And it's just beginning." As autumn crept in, bringing with it cooler nights and trees ablaze with color, Amelia's world continued to blossom. The gallery opened quietly, a soft ripple through the Charleston art community. She hosted local artists, offered free workshops for underprivileged youth, and spent her mornings lost in paint and possibility. Dominic remained her steadfast anchor, attending every exhibition, slipping handwritten notes of encouragement into her pockets, leaving single flowers in her studio with messages like, "You create beauty from nothing, just like you did with my heart." But their love wasn't without its tests. One evening, as Amelia prepared for a small gala fundraiser she had organized for her charity, she overheard a pair of socialites whispering cruelly behind her back. "She's just a charity case," one sneered. "Dominic rescued her from some gutter. She doesn't belong here no matter how pretty she is." Amelia stood frozen, the words slicing deeper than she expected. She had thought herself stronger, but old wounds had a way of bleeding when least expected. Later that night, Dominic found her sitting alone on the balcony, staring out over the city lights, her beautiful dress forgotten in the chill of the evening. "You've heard them," she said without looking at him. Dominic knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I don't care what they say, and neither should you." "I thought I was past it," Amelia whispered. "But sometimes it still hurts." Dominic cupped her face in his hands, his voice fierce with conviction. "Listen to me, Amelia. You are not your past. You are not the cruelty of others. You are not defined by the small minds of people who will never know what it means to survive, to thrive, to become more than anyone thought possible." He kissed her then, slow and sure, pouring into her every ounce of love he held. "You belong wherever you choose to stand," he murmured. "And with me, you are always, always home." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks, but they were no longer tears of sadness. They were the tears of a woman who knew with absolute certainty that she was deeply, irrevocably loved. And so she rose, stronger for the scars that once threatened to break her. That night at the gala, she stood tall beside Dominic, her hand in his, radiating a quiet, unshakable grace that no whispered cruelty could ever tarnish. In the months that followed, Their life settled into a golden rhythm, filled with work, laughter, whispered secrets in the dark. They traveled often, their passports filling with stamps from Paris, Santorini, Kyoto, and Marrakech. But always, they returned to Charleston, to the home that had seen them through the beginning of their forever. One crisp winter morning, as Amelia wrapped herself in a thick sweater and padded barefoot into the kitchen, she found Dominic already there, a tray of breakfast and a single white rose waiting for her. "What's all this?" she asked, laughing as he pulled her into a kiss. "Today's special," he said, his eyes dancing with secrets. It was only later, as they sipped coffee by the fire, that he dropped to one knee, again, a familiar velvet box in his hand. "I know I already asked you once," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But every day with you feels like the first. So Amelia Grace Holloway Grant, will you marry me again?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, laughing and crying at once. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. And as he slipped a second ring onto her finger, a delicate band engraved with the words "Forever Yours," Amelia knew in every fiber of her being that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, loved, and forever his. The seasons rolled forward, but time seemed to move differently for Amelia and Dominic. Their love had settled into something even more profound. No longer just a rush of passion, but a steady, unwavering devotion that anchored every day in meaning. Charleston blossomed around them, and so did their lives, weaving themselves into a tapestry that neither could have imagined when their journey first began. On a crisp spring morning, Amelia stood by the window of the gallery, the sun catching in her hair, painting her in gold. Dominic watched her from across the room, the same awe in his eyes he had worn the day he first saw her standing alone, so fragile and fierce all at once. She was still that girl, and yet she was so much more now. His wife, his partner, the very heartbeat of his life. Their home had expanded beyond just the two of them. After months of quiet prayers and whispered hopes in the dark, Amelia's dream had come true. They were expecting their first child. The news had changed everything and nothing all at once. Dominic became even more protective, more attentive. He rearranged his entire life around her, treating her not as someone fragile, but as someone carrying the most precious part of their love into the future. Amelia, for her part, was radiant. Pregnancy suited her, softened her even more. She spent hours in the nursery they decorated together. Soft hues of cream and pale blue, shelves lined with carefully chosen books, stuffed animals arranged with loving hands. Each night before bed, Dominic would kneel beside her, pressing kisses to her growing belly, whispering promises to the tiny life they had created. "You will always be loved," he murmured one evening, his hand resting tenderly over her. "You will always be protected." Tears had filled Amelia's eyes as she threaded her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by the fierce, overwhelming love that poured from him. She had spent so much of her life believing she was invisible, unworthy. But now, not only was she seen, she was the center of an entire universe. As her due date approached, Dominic's world narrowed to the single focus of ensuring her happiness and safety. Every doctor's appointment, he was there. Every late-night craving, he was the first to run to the kitchen, no matter how exhausted. He was. He built a fortress of love around her, brick by steady brick. And when the night finally came, when Amelia clutched his hand in the hospital room, pain etched across her face, Dominic was her rock. He stayed at her side through every contraction, every moment of fear, whispering words of love and encouragement until at last a new cry filled the room. Their daughter. The moment the tiny, squirming bundle was placed in Amelia's arms, she felt her entire heart expand beyond what she thought was humanly possible. Dominic hovered close, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he stared at their daughter like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. "She's perfect," Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. Dominic bent down, pressing a trembling kiss to Amelia's forehead, then to their daughter's tiny, wrinkled brow. "You both are," he said, his voice thick with awe. They named her Elara, a name that spoke of stars and light, of hope that stretched beyond the sky. It was fitting. She was born of love, of miracles, of second chances. Life shifted after Elara's arrival, but in the most beautiful ways. Sleep became a rare luxury, but neither Dominic nor Amelia minded. Every sleepless night was spent marveling at their daughter's tiny fingers, her delicate eyelashes, the way she curled trustingly against their chests. Dominic took to fatherhood with the same fervor he gave to everything else he loved. He was patient, attentive, endlessly tender. He sang to Elara in a low, rumbling voice that made Amelia's heart ache with happiness. He danced with her around the living room, whispering promises into her ear that only she could hear. And Amelia watched it all with a heart so full it felt it might burst. One evening, after they finally managed to get Elara to sleep, Amelia and Dominic sat on the balcony, wrapped together under a thick blanket, watching the stars blink into existence. "Did you ever imagine," Amelia said softly, "that life could be like this?" Dominic tightened his arms around her, resting his chin atop her head. "No," he admitted, "but then again, I never imagined meeting you." Silence settled around them, thick with unspoken gratitude, with memories of pain that had long since been healed, and with the deep abiding love that tethered them together. "You saved me," Amelia whispered. Dominic shook his head. "No, my love, you saved yourself. I just had the privilege of loving you while you did it." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes again, but she didn't blink them away. She had learned to embrace all her emotions now, the joy, the fear, the overwhelming gratitude. They were all part of the life she had built, the life they had built together as the years slipped by. Elara grew into a bright, curious child who possessed her mother's strength and her father's intensity. She filled their home with laughter, questions, and endless adventures. Dominic taught her to ride a bike, Amelia taught her to paint, and together they taught her that she was loved beyond measure. They celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes and candlelit dinners. They took vacations to quiet lakes and bustling cities, introducing Elara to the wide, wonderful world beyond their doorstep. They built traditions that would last a lifetime. Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night movies, whispered prayers before bed. And through it all, Dominic and Amelia remained each other's anchor, each other's first and last thought of the day. Their 10th wedding anniversary, Dominic took Amelia back to the very spot where he had first asked her to be his forever. The garden behind their Charleston home, now lush and wild with years of love and life. Amelia stood in a simple white dress, barefoot in the grass, Elara twirling nearby with a crown of daisies in her hair. Dominic approached her, a small box in hand, his eyes crinkling with the same adoration they always had. "I would marry you 1,000 times over," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And still it would never be enough." Amelia laughed through her tears as he slipped a third ring onto her finger, a delicate band intertwined with tiny diamonds, symbolizing their journey, their growth, their infinite love. "You're mine," he whispered, just as he had all those years ago. "Forever," she replied, her voice steady, certain. The world had spun them through storms and heartbreak, through fear and doubt, but here they stood, not broken but stronger, not merely survivors but warriors of love. And as they kissed beneath the ancient oak tree that had witnessed the birth of their forever, Amelia realized something simple and profound. True love wasn't about grand gestures or flawless days. It was about choosing each other, again and again, through every sunrise and every storm. It was about building a life so rich in meaning that even the darkest memories were outshone by the light of their shared hope. It was about knowing that no matter what tomorrow held, they would face it hand in hand, together, always. And so, under the vast South Carolina sky, Amelia Holloway Grant, once a broken girl with shattered dreams, stood wrapped in the arms of the man who had never tried to fix her, only to love her. And in his embrace, she finally fully forever found her home. Amelia and Dominic's journey reminds us that love is not about perfection or grand gestures. True love is found in the quiet moments of loyalty, in the fierce determination to protect one another, and in the everyday choices to stay, to nurture, and to believe in each other when no one else does. Their story is a powerful testament to the truth that healing is possible, that even the most broken hearts can find wholeness in the right hands. Through resilience, kindness, and the courage to open her heart again, Amelia transformed her life from one of despair into one of overwhelming joy. Dominic, too, showed that strength is not just measured by wealth or power, but by the depth of one's love and the willingness to stand by someone through every storm. Together, they created a life built not on promises of material success, but on unwavering devotion, mutual respect, and the kind of hope that lights even the darkest paths. The message is simple yet profound. No matter how shattered your beginnings, maybe you are never too broken to find love, never too lost to find your way home. With trust, patience, and belief in yourself and others, a new chapter, a beautiful one, is always within reach. If this story touched your heart and inspired you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to to continue creating more beautiful, emotional, and meaningful stories that remind us all of the power of hope, healing, and love. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts with us. And stay tuned for the next story that just might change the way you see the world.